A 7-year-old boy in a pressed button-down shirt sat completely alone at a long banquet table, staring at a chocolate cake with 7 unlit candles, while every adult in the room looked everywhere except at him. The ballroom at the Hargrove Estate Club was everything money could rent for a Saturday afternoon: gold-rimmed plates, a string quartet near the fireplace, towers of macarons in pastel colors that nobody was eating. 43 guests had shown up, most of them colleagues and clients of the boy's grandmother, a woman who had spent 30 years building one of the most respected real estate development firms in Charlotte, North Carolina. She had reserved the biggest private event room in the building, ordered flowers from 3 different florists, and made sure the guest list reflected exactly the kind of woman she wanted the world to see. The birthday boy's name was Henry. He sat with both hands flat on the tablecloth, watching the candles that had never been lit, and he did not cry. He had learned, somewhere between his 5th and 6th birthdays, that crying in rooms like this one did not help anything. Across the ballroom, his grandmother, Constance Whitfield, stood near the bar holding a glass of sparkling water and laughing at something a man in a gray suit had just said. She was 61 years old and looked 50. Her posture was perfect, her laugh was calibrated. She had built her career on reading rooms, on knowing exactly what people needed to see, and on delivering it with precision. She was, by every measurable standard, successful. She had also, without fully realizing it, organized her grandson's 7th birthday party around her own professional calendar. Henry had been in Constance's care for 14 months. His mother, her daughter, had died of a sudden cardiac event the previous spring, leaving behind a husband named Miles Carver, and a 6-year-old son who had not fully understood what funeral meant until he realized his mother never came home after it. Miles had tried. He was a structural engineer who worked long contracts, often out of state, and for the first year he had arranged his schedule around Henry, with the obsessive precision of someone trying to solve grief through logistics. But grief does not respond to logistics. And children do not need logistics. They need someone to sit next to them. Constance had stepped in the way powerful people step into crises, with resources, with authority, with the absolute conviction that if she applied enough of both, the problem would resolve. She had moved Henry into her home, enrolled him in a private school, hired a part-time tutor for the afternoons, given him a bedroom with a window seat, and shelves full of books he was not yet old enough to read. She loved him. Nobody who saw her with him would doubt that, but love, when it has spent 30 years operating inside a boardroom, sometimes forgets to take off its jacket when it comes home. The birthday party had been her idea entirely. Miles was between projects, currently in Raleigh, and had driven up that morning specifically for Henry's birthday. He had stood with Constance near the entrance an hour earlier, asking quietly if the guest list might have been a little heavy on her professional contacts, and a little light on Henry's classmates. Constance had smiled the way she smiled when she had already made a decision and did not intend to revisit it, and said that children adapt, and that this was also an opportunity for Henry to feel proud in front of people who mattered. Miles had not pushed back. He never pushed back with Constance. She was his son's stability, and challenging her felt like pulling a thread from something he could not afford to unravel. So Henry sat alone at the birthday table, and Miles stood near the edge of the room watching him, and neither of them said anything out loud about what was happening, which is sometimes the loneliest kind of silence there is. Henry was not a dramatic child. He did not throw tantrums or make scenes. He was the kind of kid who went quiet when things got hard, who pushed his feelings down to a small, manageable size and carried them without complaining, which adults sometimes mistook for resilience when it was actually just a child who had decided that his feelings were not safe to show in public. His teachers had noted that he was thoughtful, attentive, and unusually self-contained for his age. What they meant, without knowing how to say it, was that he had already learned to take up less space than he deserved. The string quartet shifted into something softer near the windows, and a few of the adults drifted to refill their plates at the catering station, and Henry watched the chocolate cake, and traced one finger along the edge of the tablecloth, back and forth, back and forth. That was when Miles decided to stop standing at the edge of the room. He was 39 years old, broad-shouldered, with the kind of quietly weathered face that comes from spending years on job sites in all weather. He was not particularly comfortable at events like this was. He owned 2 suits, one for funerals, one for meetings, and he was wearing the meeting one. He did not know most of the people in this room, had no investment in their opinions of him, and had spent the past 40 minutes trying to figure out how to be useful to his son in an environment designed for everyone, except his son. He crossed the room, he did not hurry and he did not perform. He walked to Henry's table the way a man walks to the kitchen for a glass of water, like it was simply the next thing he was going to do. He pulled out the chair next to Henry and sat down. Henry looked up. Something moved across his face, not quite surprise, not quite relief, something between the two that doesn't really have a clean name. Miles said, "Hey buddy." Henry said, "Hey Dad." They sat together for a moment without talking, which was fine. Some of the best conversations between fathers and sons happen in the space before the words start. Then Miles reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a small flat box, the kind that comes from a hardware store rather than a toy shop. He set it on the table. Henry looked at it. "Open it," Miles said. Inside was a set of woodworking chisels, small ones sized for a child's hands, with smooth ash handles and a roll of leather to keep them in. They were real tools, not toy tools. Miles had ordered them 3 weeks earlier from a craftsman in Vermont, who made them specifically for young beginners. Henry picked one up and turned it over in his hands. "I thought," Miles said, "that when I'm back from Raleigh we could build something. Together, whatever you want, a birdhouse, a little shelf, whatever." Henry looked at the chisel in his hand for a long moment. Then he said, "Can we build a box? For Mom's stuff?" Miles took a breath that he let out slowly. "Yeah," he said. "We can build a box." This was not the kind of birthday moment that looks good in photographs. Nobody was watching, there was no backdrop, no matching balloon arrangement, no personalized cake topper. There was just a father and a son sitting side by side at a table, and a 7-year-old holding a small wood chisel and deciding, quietly and without ceremony, that this was going to be okay. Across the room, Constance Whitfield glanced toward the birthday table and felt something tighten in her chest that she did not immediately recognize. It took her a moment, because it had been a long time since she had felt it. The particular discomfort of realizing that something important was happening, and she was not part of it. Not because she had been excluded, but because she had excluded herself. She had been so focused on building the event around what she thought Henry needed that she had entirely failed to notice what Henry needed was already in the room, wearing a slightly ill-fitting suit, sitting in a chair nobody had assigned him. She set down her glass. The string quartet kept playing. Somewhere near the catering station, a man was making a joke about interest rates. Constance walked across the ballroom. She had not planned what she was going to say, which was unusual for her. She generally planned everything. But she arrived at the table and looked at her grandson sitting next to his father, holding a tiny chisel with both hands, and she said the only thing that came to her. "Henry, do you want to light the candles now?" Henry looked up at her. Then he looked at Miles, then back at Constance. "With just us?" he asked. It was such a small question, 4 words. But there was something in it, a whole history of parties where the adults had all been doing something else, of rooms that were technically for him, but not really, of a child who had learned to ask for very little, and so had started specifying what little thing he wanted when the opportunity arrived. Constance did not hesitate. "With just us," she said. She sat down across from him. Miles shifted his chair closer. The 3 of them sat together at the birthday table, while 40-odd professional contacts continued their Saturday afternoon conversations approximately 15 feet away, and none of it mattered at all. Constance struck the match herself. She had not lit a birthday candle in years, possibly decades. And her hand was steadier than she expected. The 7 small flames caught and held, and the candlelight made the chocolate frosting glow, and Henry looked at the cake the way children look at birthday cakes, when the moment is actually theirs. "Make a wish," Miles said. Henry thought about it for 4 or 5 seconds. Seriously, the way a 7-year-old thinks about things when he believes they matter, and then he blew out all 7 candles at once. The room did not notice. Nobody applauded. The string quartet played on. None of that mattered either. What happened in the following weeks was not dramatic. It did not unfold the way things unfold in stories where a single moment changes everything overnight. Life is rarely that clean. What happened instead was slower and quieter, and more durable. Miles finished his Raleigh project 2 weeks earlier than scheduled. He had negotiated the timeline adjustment before he left, telling his project manager that he had a personal obligation, which was the most professional version of saying that his son's 7th birthday had clarified something for him about what his priorities had actually become. He moved back to Charlotte, not permanently, not right away. His work still required travel, and that was not going to change entirely, but he began structuring his contracts differently, building in longer home stretches, taking fewer back-to-back projects out of state. He found an apartment 12 minutes from Constance's house, close enough for Henry to move between them without it feeling like a journey, far enough that it was his own space, which mattered in ways he had not entirely admitted to himself before. Henry kept the chisels on his desk. He did not use them yet. They were waiting for the project. But he took them out sometimes and laid them on the leather roll and looked at them, which Miles understood completely, because he had spent his whole career around craftsmen who had the same relationship to the right tools. Constance, for her part, did something that people who knew her well would have found surprising. She started rearranging her Saturday schedule, not drastically, not all at once. But the professional brunches and the client check-ins that had occupied every Saturday morning for the past several years began quietly to migrate to other days. She did not announce this, she did not frame it as a personal transformation or a lesson learned. She simply started being available on Saturday mornings, and Henry started knowing she would be there, and that knowing changed the texture of the rest of the week for both of them, in ways neither could fully articulate. They started cooking together. This was Constance's idea, which surprised Miles when Henry mentioned it. She had hired a personal chef for most of the past decade, and had not cooked seriously since her daughter was young, but she had found, in one of the kitchen drawers, a recipe card in her daughter's handwriting, a simple pound cake, the kind her daughter had made every year for Henry's first few birthdays, and she had stood at the kitchen counter holding that index card for a long time. The first time they made it, it came out wrong. Too dense, slightly overbaked. Henry ate 2 pieces anyway and said it was good, which made Constance laugh. A real laugh, the kind that surprised her when it came out. They made it again the following weekend. Better that time, and the weekend after that. Miles built the box with Henry on a Saturday in late October. They drove to a lumber yard, and Henry chose the wood himself, running his hand along the edge of each plank, with a solemnity that made the man working the counter smile. They spent 2 weekends on it. Henry was not naturally precise in the way that Miles was, but he was patient and careful, and asked questions that were better than Miles expected. The box came out slightly imperfect. One corner joint not quite flush, the lid sitting a few millimeters off center, and they looked at it together when it was done, and agreed that it was exactly right. Inside the box, Henry placed 3 things. A photograph of his mother laughing at something off camera, taken on a beach when Henry was 3. A blue hair tie she had worn every day, and that had been in the pocket of Miles's jacket since the funeral. And a drawing Henry had made at school the month after she died. 2 people holding hands, labeled in the oversized uncertain letters of a child who had recently learned to write, "Mom and me." Miles sealed the box with a small brass latch they had picked out together at the hardware store. He did not say anything when Henry placed the drawing inside. There was nothing to say that would have been better than silence. Henry set the box on the window seat in his room, next to the books he was not yet old enough to read. Constance did not talk about what had shifted in her, because she was not naturally a person who narrated her own interior life. But there were small signs, if you were looking. She started asking Henry about his day, with actual curiosity, rather than the efficient competence of someone conducting an intake assessment. She stopped using her phone during dinner. She attended 2 school events in a row that appeared on her calendar as conflicts, and rearranged the conflicts instead. She called Miles on a Tuesday for no professional reason, just to tell him that Henry had said something funny at breakfast, and the conversation lasted 40 minutes. The party, everyone agreed, had not been a success by any traditional metric. Almost no one from Henry's class had attended. The professional guests had been pleasant and thoroughly uninterested in the birthday boy, which Henry had noticed and would probably always remember. The string quartet had packed up and left before the cake was cut for the room, because the cake had been cut only for 3 people at a small corner table, while everyone else continued talking about interest rates and property values. But something real had happened at that table. Something that had needed to happen for a long time. Henry was not a child who talked about feelings directly. But 3 weeks after the party, during one of the Saturday morning cooking sessions, while he and Constance were waiting for the pound cake to come out of the oven, he said, without looking up from the counter, "I liked my birthday this year." Constance looked at him. "Because of Dad?" she asked. Henry thought about it. "Because of you and Dad," he said. "Both." He went back to drawing on a piece of scrap paper, something that looked like a floor plan for a structure he was apparently designing. Constance looked at the oven, did not say anything for a moment, and then she said, "I liked it too," which was the truest thing she had said out loud in longer than she could easily measure. There are parents who believe that giving a child the best means giving a child the most. The best school, the best room, the best party, the best opportunities, the best of everything that money and status and influence can procure. And sometimes those things genuinely help. But sometimes, in the middle of building the most spectacular version of a life, it is possible to walk right past the child sitting at the table, waiting for someone to simply pull up a chair. Henry did not need a ballroom. He did not need a string quartet, or gold-rimmed plates, or towers of macarons in 3 colors. He needed his father to sit down next to him. He needed his grandmother to light the candles, and ask if they could do it just the 3 of them. He needed 2 imperfect joints on a wooden box, and a Tuesday phone call that lasted 40 minutes for no particular reason. He needed to know he was not taking up too much tss. He needed to know that the space he took up was exactly the right amount. That is not an expensive thing to give a child. It costs nothing except attention, and sometimes the whole shape of a life can turn on a single Saturday afternoon, when someone decides that the most important thing in the room is a 7-year-old boy, sitting alone at a table, with 7 unlit candles, waiting for someone to notice that he is there.